Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show, Colorado Business News, in our continuing series with members of the Colorado General Assembly. Today we have 2 senators and 1 member from the House of Representatives here in Colorado. And it looks like Republicans are outnumbering the Democrats 2-1 once again. Senator Chris Harber is here. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Aaron, thanks so much for having me again. Senate District 30 is down in Douglas County. I represent about 150,000 people who live in Parker, Lone Tree, Highlands Ranch, Roxborough Park, down to Sedalia, Castle Pines North. In each one of the 35 Senate districts, it's about 150,000 people. I think in the General Assembly, what becomes evident when you become a member and you're standing there debating different issues is that we're not sent there to all think the same way. Our communities are different. Colorado is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. We have a fairly balanced political perspective statewide, but the individual districts can be very, very different. And I think for those of us who serve in the state Senate or state House, that's paramount for us to understand who are the people we represent, what are the majority opinions on key issues. We campaign in those issues, and those 35 districts in the Senate, 65 districts in the House, the majority of voters who vote, they decide who goes down to the state capitol and represents them. And it's actually quite fun to get there and find out where we agree and where we disagree. And disagreement's okay. That's why we're sent there, is to wrestle with tough issues and try to find common ground.
All right, well, you're south of the Capitol, a fair bit north of the Capitol, Senator John Kafalis. John, tell us a little bit about your district.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. Thanks for this opportunity. So I represent Senate District 14, which is most of the city of Fort Collins. The current population of Fort Collins is about 156,000 people. It's a place that I've called home for about 40 years. It's an interesting place in a lot of ways, but certainly one of the things that's important to know about Fort Collins is that we are the home of Colorado State University, the main campus, and that's a big economic driver. In terms of the question posed regarding decision making and how do we balance everything. Obviously, it's important to listen to our constituents. We have a very diversity in terms of political perspectives and ideas on how to solve problems and all of that. So foremost, it's important to listen to folks, and frankly, and I think it aligns well with what how you try to advance the notion of civil discourse. I think part of our job responsibility is to create opportunities for folks to do civic engagement. And so we have town hall meetings, we have community conversations, and that's one way that we get to listen to folks. And then we take that as well as a variety of other factors to try to make informed decisions, down at the Capitol.
All right, and Representative Kit Rupe. Kit, you're the sole member of the House on the panel. I hope you don't feel isolated, but you have at least a Republican colleague in Chris, and you outnumber John 2-1. But tell me about your district and your experience.
Well, thank you again for having us here today. This is a terrific opportunity. I represent House District 17, which is southeast Colorado Springs, and it probably is a closer representation of Colorado than many realize. It's 34% Democrat, 33 unaffiliated, and 32 Republican. So it's a varied background, and certainly it's a lower income area or a moderate income area, and so the decisions we make really affect people, and yet they're the ones that are working the hardest. So certainly I like to do the public outreach and get out there and talk to the citizens and do the town halls, but then I'm already walking door to door because sometimes it's just hard for them to take some time out of their busy day. I really this is my first year, as you know, my first session, and I really enjoyed it. It's, as Senator Holbert had mentioned, it's really nice to have that conversation and learn the different perspectives and where you agree or disagree and where you can work together. And so by and large, it's been a very wonderful, eye-opening opportunity. I think that people just need to be aware that we do work for them, that this is our job is to be their voice at the Capitol, and representing about 75,000 people is no small endeavor. So it's my pleasure, and I'm honored, and it's a privilege to be there for them.
What, in your experience, in your limited experience so far, What about the General Assembly would you like people to know that they don't know about, that whether it be your constituents or Coloradans in general? If you had to think of something on that order, what should we know about the General Assembly that most of us don't know?
I think it's very realistic to recognize that we come from different parts of the state. We have different voices that we have to bring to the Capitol, and we don't all agree, but we work pretty well together. And we will sit down and have a conversation or a discussion with a great deal of civility, I think, in our State House to talk about the different perspectives and what's important and what's not important. And then we vote, and it's not an easy thing to get a bill signed. It has to go through a process in the House, it has to go through a process in the Senate, and if it's a good bill, it will rise and carry on over to the governor. So I can't emphasize how important it is for people to realize we just don't cavalierly come up with ideas. We reach out to our constituents. They give us kind of the font of ideas and where we should start looking to resolve some issues, and then come to our colleagues at the Capitol and see if we can find some solutions that we can all work with statewide.
All right, John, give me your take on what would you like more Coloradans to know about the General Assembly that they don't know?
Thank you, Sarah. And just to build a little bit on what Kit said, one fact is that, I forget the exact number, but more than 90% of the bills that ultimately make it to the governor's desk are bipartisan. So that's important in this world where there's an awful lot of polarization and hyper-partisanship. While we have our moments down at the Capitol, I think by and large, there is civility. By and large, we find places for common ground. And again, a vast majority of bills that go to the governor are bipartisan. So I think that's important for folks to know. And despite all of these things, foremost, we have a responsibility to pass a balanced budget and the School Finance Act. So if we do nothing else and just do those two things, that is what the Constitution and statute requires of us.
All right, Chris, you get the last shot at the question.
I love this topic. I spend a lot of time on Facebook and social media helping people understand what's true. And I think the most common issues are people confuse us with Congress. We are not in session year-round. We don't have lawmaking authority 12 months out of the year. We have lawmaking authority 120 days out of each year, weekends and holidays included. We don't make six-figure salaries. We don't have big staff. Right now, I have no one who works for me. It's just me. And I'm right there in the community where the people who I represent. I'm there every day. I don't go to Washington, D.C. And some of that seems very elementary, and I think it's healthy for us to keep the perspective that people are busy with their lives. They're raising their kids. They're working at their jobs. They're running companies, trying to drive success and prosperity in their world. And they don't have time to pay attention to all the different levels of government. I think it's also important in Colorado that people understand the higher up in government that one goes, it isn't like a corporate structure. It isn't that the state managers can tell county managers or town managers what to do. We have local control here, and very often I'm asked to, well, can you step in and overrule this town council or this mayor or school board? And the answer is no, that's not how our government works. So just helping people understand how government works and what's true, I think that can only benefit the people of Colorado.
Okay. All right. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with our panel in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. For information about the program, who our upcoming guests and topics are, and ways you can participate, please go to our website. That's harbertv.com. And most of all, thanks for watching.
I'm Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland.
Hi, I'm Jim Cameron, Director of Avatar.
I'm Christina Johnson, former Undersecretary of Energy.
Hi, I'm Oliver Stone.
Hi, I'm Mike Peters. I'm the creator of Mother Goose and Grimm.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
I would encourage you to watch the Aaron Harber Show. It's good fun.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show because he's a really cool guy.
Please watch the Aaron Harber Show, on which I do appear.
I want you to watch the Aaron Harber Show. Grimmy watches it every day.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter and find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Your opinions, ideas, suggestions, and criticisms related to guests, topics, questions, or the host are welcome. Please send an email to producer@harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is part one of a two-part series with our legislative panel, Kit Rupe, John Kafalis, and Chris Holbert. So, John, I'm going to start with you. What about the culture of government? Does it need to be changed? And are people's expectations of government unreasonable?
I think that, first of all, in response to your question, sir, it's important to be mindful of what level of government we're talking about. And from our experience, we are most familiar with the state level of government. And I would say there's always opportunities for improvement. And so, yes, we do need to change the culture of government. Part of that ties into this notion of how do we rebuild trust in government. I think when they do all the surveys and the questioning, politicians don't rank high. And so we have a responsibility to help restore that trust and to help people understand what is the proper role of government in terms of solving some of the issues that face our communities. So that's the answer to the first part of your question. And very quickly, regarding expectations, I think that folks expect us to be accountable, available, and that's why whether we're knocking on doors or whether we're creating opportunities in the community, town halls, forums on topics, I mean, that's part of the job description. And people expect us fundamentally to get the job done and to find ways to work together, recognizing that there's always going to be some degree of, the reality is of politics. There's an intersection of politics and policy. In my view, how do we downplay the politics part and really focus on the policy part?
All right, Chris, I'm going to let you have the next shot at that question.
Well, I think to carry over to our prior conversation, I think it's a very important role for being a state legislator to help constituents understand what's true about state government. I hear people say, well, we need to have term limits. And we've had term limits in the state legislature and our local elected offices since, I think, 1993, and I voted for that. And people so often look to Washington, D.C. and Congress and assume that all government operates the same way. Our state government, we have limited it in our state constitution with a 120-day session that we're there making law. Very often I have people contact me, they're frustrated with something in the executive branch, and I can make calls and be a traffic cop, but I have no authority over them. So I think it can be somewhat disarming to help people understand how it actually works. We might talk about the budget and what's the reality of where the money comes from, how much is there, and how it's allocated. And I think that with the business community especially, it's helpful to help all people understand how it actually works.
Do we need to do a better job in civics education, perhaps?
Maybe adult civics. I find people are very interested in it. I get a lot of compliments on my Facebook post, for instance, and people say, I didn't know that. So understanding what's true, I think, helps dispel some of the incorrect assumptions. And that's not to say that there's nothing to worry about with government. People are distrustful, and there are many reasons for them to be so. But at the state level, especially in the legislature, if we looked at all of the branches in the executive branch and how they're funded, the legislative branch compared to the departments and divisions, we're the smallest one there is. So we work for the people, and I think it's helpful for people to understand, again, what's true and what isn't true, and how we can help them achieve their goals.
Kit, what's your experience in terms of the culture of government and how you think it needs to be changed, if at all, and people's expectations, and not just in your district?
Well, I think that I actually was kind of critical of some of the expectations of the legislators thinking that we can go straight into a department and tell them how they can do something. So I consider myself an ambassador. I will take what I know and share the pieces of information, something like what Chris does on his Facebook page. And as I go door to door and they'll complain about a city issue or a county issue or a state issue or even a federal issue, I try to play the goodwill ambassador. I think that is part of what we need to be doing to build up that trust in government, is that we're not in a silo and everything else is not something that we care about. We do care about it. We work vertically, as I like to say, all the way from the basic ground up and provide the resources to the folks that are on the ground. And we start changing that culture by being a helping hand rather than just somebody who passes somebody through. As far as our legislative folks, I think that Chris had it right. We are certainly a smaller part of the government, and we're a part and piece of it, but I think we play a critical role. We can bring folks together to start talking about things that they might not necessarily have wanted to talk about, or they don't have a solution to resolve, and we play an important part to solving problems that the everyday folks might see on the ground. And so one of my big deals, which is what I started to talk about thinking I was ahead of myself, was about the rulemaking. We might pass a law, folks may not realize this, years ago that a department created a series of rules to implement that law. And over a number of years, incrementally, we've created a monster. And so periodically, we should go back and review what those rules are and what those laws are, and really assess the value of what we're trying to do for our public in the operation of government, rather than creating even more gridlock and red tape. So to me, that would also do a great deal to improve our culture and the expectation of people have of us as a government.
You know, you mentioned, all of you have mentioned the concept of trust in government, or the lack of trust in government. Chris, you stressed the differentiation between levels of federal, state, county, municipal government, et cetera. What fascinates me, one of the big debates in the country constantly involves the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, to own weapons. And what I've been fascinated by is, setting aside that specific issue, is the number of people in our country who want to be armed because they fear or believe they need to be armed in case the government attacks them. And I don't know if there are other societies, industrialized societies, that have populations with significant numbers of people who feel they need to arm themselves against their own government. So I'd be really interested in your take on that. Not on the right to bear arms, but the fact that so many of us are so distrustful of our government that we feel we need to be ready to fight them. So John, I'm really interested in your thoughts on this, and Chris, and then Kit, if that's okay. And I know we're about to run out of time, but go ahead and we'll extend the segment.
No, thank you, Aaron. That's an interesting question. That's an interesting angle on this issue of the Second Amendment. I think partially to respond to your question, because I guess I need to give it some more thought, is that, there's an interesting history that we have in this country. From the founding of this country, the dynamics between the Federalists and the anti-Federalist states' rights versus, centralization of power. I think that's part of it, and if we go back through history, we can see that, different episodes or chapters of our history, perhaps, there are segments of our society that have felt that, there's legitimate reasons to be concerned about, government and government, taking charge. And one has to acknowledge that. I don't know where the truth lies in all that. There are a lot of conspiracy theories out there from, 9/11, for example, and I was in New York when that happened. But that would be my response to your. It's not the best response, but that's what I would say.
It's a start. Chris, what's your sense? I'm sure you know, as I do, many people who really feel they need to be armed in potential opposition to our own government.
Well, I think we need to start at the beginning and recognize that the founders, the revolutionaries, they did exactly what you're observing in our society now, that people feel like they need to be armed to defend themselves against government. Well, okay, if we're going to criticize people today for having that perspective, ought we not criticize George Washington and the rest who were there at the founding of our nation?
Well, I guess maybe the other question is, well, haven't we made any progress from that point in terms of, trusting our government? Certainly other industrialized nations have often gone through similar, whether it be revolutions, uprising, and have evolved to a point where most citizens have, it seems, much greater confidence in their government than our citizens. So to me, there seems to be a significant gap. I could be wrong, but that rarely happens. So.
I think we ought not question any law-abiding citizen's perspective on that. If you choose not to, and the next person does, that's one of the great things that we have under our Constitution, is make those decisions for ourselves.
Well, I'm not saying that perspective is wrong. I'm just surprised at the number and percentage of people who really don't trust our government, at least at certain levels. Maybe at the federal level more than the municipal level. I don't know.
Well, I don't find surprise, so I guess as we were talking earlier, maybe you and I disagree. I define the Second Amendment as our defense against tyranny. And maybe the assumption would be, we're going to, tyranny means a dictator in government. Not necessarily. Tyranny is defined as the uncontrolled exercise of power. And even the individual who seeks to have that uncontrolled exercise of power over just one other person or a group of people, that's why we have the Second Amendment. And that's why I'm a proud supporter and defender of it, is that the Second Amendment is not about hunting rights or target practice or even concealed carry. It is our individual ability to defend ourselves against tyranny, and it's our collective defense against tyranny, which is exactly what the founders, the revolutionaries, did with a government that was tyrannical. But again, tyranny doesn't have to come from government. It can come from one individual.
All right, Kit, what's your take? I know, and then we've got to take a break, but I want to give you a chance to.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I too believe in maintaining and keeping our Second Amendment rights, but I appreciate some of the fears that people have. They've probably had an experience where somebody was tyrannical to them, and they had to defend themselves, and they felt somehow there was some shortage there, and so now they feel that they can take some things into their own hands, and it might be this weapon. I would say that it's very important for us to know that we have some freedoms here, and there is some personal responsibility. And although people may have some angst about government, and they may have some concerns about being able to protect their rights, that is their show that you will not find them asleep, that they're going to stand tall and let you know when you've stepped on them. So I think it's very important for us to recognize these rights were put there for a specific reason, and we should be there to defend them. And just because there's a small fraction that feel that it's gone over, that they need to defend themselves against a greater problem, they may say there is a bigger problem out there, but it might be something in specific that they're reacting to. So.
See, I see the tyranny of government occurring daily, but not in terms of physical violence. So to me, that's another issue. Well, we can talk about that when we come back. Maybe we're going to come back with our three guests in just a moment, so stay tuned for more.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. For information about the program, who our upcoming guests and topics are, and ways you can participate, please go to our website. That's harbertv.com. And most of all, thanks for watching.
I'm Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland.
Hi, I'm Jim Cameron, Director of Avatar.
I'm Christina Johnson, former Undersecretary of Energy.
Hi, I'm Oliver Stone.
Hi, I'm Mike Peters. I'm the creator of Mother Goose and Grimm.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
I would encourage you to watch the Aaron Harber Show. It's good fun.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show, because he's a really cool guy.
Please watch The Aaron Harber Show, on which I do appear.
I want you to watch the Aaron Harber Show. Grimmy watches it every day.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter and find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Your opinions, ideas, suggestions, and criticisms related to guests, topics, questions, or the host are welcome. Please send an email to producer@harbortv.com.
All right, welcome back to the show. We are in our final segment of part one of our two-part series with our legislative panel. So, John, I wanted to give you a chance to comment on what we had just discussed. So please go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation we had earlier. The only thing I would add is that in our country, what makes our country unique and great in many, many ways is that we have checks and balances in place. We have the three branches of government, and if the people are informed and engaged in the republic and the representative democracy, then I think we can that's one way of defending against oppressive governments or tyrannical governments.
Well, see, my point was I think that different branches of government can be tyrannical in terms of imposition of rules, in terms of interpretation of laws, in terms of how they enforce laws. And one of the things I want to talk about, in fact, is that we have moved in a society from a society where we may legislate certain rules and regulations to now where we criminalize almost everything. There are municipalities that if you don't shovel the snow on your walk, you can actually face time in jail. Or if you don't cut weeds to a certain height, you not only can be fined. That criminalization strikes me as tyrannical and a huge mistake. Are we doing anything about it? Is this a serious problem, or am I barking up the wrong tree? Chris, I'm going to give you a quick shot at this.
Well, I've looked north to Wyoming. There's a rancher there, I think, that's facing tens of millions of dollars in penalties from the EPA because he followed all the local and county and state rules on building a retaining pond to hold water. But the EPA steps in and says, no, you can't do that. And if those fines are upheld, I think it fine him out of existence. So I think that's a great example of how we all, on both sides of the party, or both sides of the political aisle, need to remember that the people come first in the Constitution, then the legislative branch, then the executive branch, then judicial. It isn't government's job to be paramount. It's the people, and we should serve them.
Kit, should we take a look at decriminalizing so many laws that the hundreds of laws that we've passed, which can put people in jail for they're not physical or actual crimes against other people?
Certainly, I think that that's worthy of looking at. There was a reason why those laws were passed. There was something that seemed to be criminal or oppressive or somebody overstepping their rights onto somebody else's rights that might have brought those rules about. But re-examining, are those situations still valid? I think that that's well worth taking a little bit of time and assessing it. And then we have to remember we're a local controlled kind of state. Most of the activities we see take place at the local level, certainly within reach of the population. Now, having said that, many of my constituents can't necessarily go and make a difference, but that it's very important for them to know they are part of the solution.
Okay, well, I would disagree that the criminalization was even necessary in the first place. Good example, the Eric Garner case in New York, who was illegally selling cigarettes and was killed by the police. I mean, does someone deserve that kind of treatment for what is something you should be fined for example?
I think we can all agree that that was egregious and that went way over the top. Nobody can argue with that, but again, that was at a local level. And those folks, those citizens are certainly taking those folks to task. Was it something that was done at a different branch of government is the question, but people have to be part of the solution.
All right, but my point is that when you criminalize crimes like that, you're bringing in law enforcement, you're bringing in the police, you're elevating it to a level that I think does not deserve to be reached. But that's just my opinion.
We overreacted.
Well, I would agree with that. Okay, well, this is the end of part one. Stay tuned for part two with my three guests from the General Assembly. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.